depending on who plays, obviously it changes who could potentially be the biggest matchup. But I do want to talk for a minute here about what we think the biggest matchups are against the Baltimore Ravens, because this is one that we've seen obviously 2 times a year for every year, forever and ever. Amen. We saw it a couple of weeks ago. Steelers get the best of the Baltimore Ravens 18-16 in a game that they didn't need to score a touchdown to beat Lamar Jackson. And at the time, the number one scoring offense in the NFL. So, Jake, I'll ask you to lead this one off. What is the biggest matchup that you're watching for in Steelers-Ravens Part 2 this Saturday?
Well, I think for me, it's the Steelers' offensive line going up against the front seven of the Baltimore Ravens. The Eagles downright bullied the Steelers' offensive line in that defeat. And, who hasn't gotten pushed around by the Eagles in this 10-game winning streak they're on? Like, they are just, an unbelievable football team right now. So it's not a total indictment of the Steelers' offensive line play, but for a unit that's been encouraging and getting better and giving Najee and Jalen a ton of push at the line of scrimmage and point of contact, they were beat often. I think part of that is just a more experienced unit and a very talented group going against a younger unit in the Steelers' offensive line. This is an opportunity for them to bounce back in a big way in a rivalry game. I think is a great way to sort of put in that built-in momentum and fire that you need to sort of have a bounce back game. So I'm watching them to see if, how Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick and company respond against the Ravens defensive line. And hopefully they can score a touchdown on the back of like some bruising offensive line play.
Yeah, let's be brutally honest here. The Baltimore Ravens front seven torched the Steelers offensive line in that matchup back in week 11. 4 sacks in the first half, and I understand they settled it down. They didn't give up a sack at all in the second half, but Nnamdi Madubuike and Odafe Oweh were teeing off in the first half of that game against Russell Wilson, and you just can't start from that, especially considering the fact that Russell Wilson over the last couple of weeks, I wouldn't say he's been shaky, but he's gotten off to slow starts. You need to protect him early in this game to allow him to kind of get the offense off to a better start, because they can't continue to start off, 3 and out here, 3 and out there. Oh, our defense created a turnover. It's fine. We're just going to kick a field goal. Like, it's great to have a field goal kicker like Boz. It'd be nice if he didn't have to use him as often as he did. So I agree with you. I think this is a massive matchup. The Pittsburgh Steelers need to win. I mean, last game against these guys, 74 total rushing yards. The Steelers' rushing game has not been good the last couple of weeks. They're going to need it on the road. You're going to need it. And that's when Mason McCormick is at his best. That's when Zach Frazier is at his best. That's when Broderick Jones is at his best. These guys are great in the run game. Get off the ball, push it down the field, and let some of the pressure be taken off of Russell Wilson's shoulders, because you're actually winning your matchups against, again, listen, you mentioned the Eagles have one of the best defensive fronts in football. Same goes for the Baltimore Ravens. They're still the best rushing defense in the National Football League, and it all starts up front. But the Steelers, if you're going to want to win this one and take the North, it all starts up front for them again. Last week I said there were 4 line units out there. The one unit that didn't show up was the Steelers' offensive line. They need to be those guys this week.
Yeah, 100%. Otherwise, it's just they're going to lose this game, and then, it's going to descend into absolute chaos in terms of the Steelers' postseason chances and their Super Bowl odds. But, I think that the good thing that I've seen out of the Steelers all season, or one of the good things, is that they've been able to show adjustments. And whenever they were getting beat in one way, whether it is, the matchup against the Ravens where they were just kind of getting crushed and Russ was getting taken down left and right, and then they stepped up and made some adjustments in the second half. I'm curious if they were able to isolate certain parts of that second half that worked, and if they're going to implement it, or if it's going to be, another one of those things where the Steelers start slow again, and then have to sort of catch up, follow the strategy, follow the game plan again, and maybe that'll get them back online. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and I do think they're up to the challenge. I really do. It's just, these are what good teams are made of. They rise to these really difficult challenges, especially after, adversity like they just went through with that loss to the Eagles.
So I do like this, as this was your obviously biggest matchup here, Steelers O-line versus Ravens D-line. I'm going on the same side of the football for the Steelers. I think it's Russell Wilson versus the Ravens secondary. I mean, I understand the Baltimore Ravens have been much better. Mike Tomlin was glowing about them in his press conference on Monday, saying, they brought in a new coach, and since then they've kind of started to turn the tide. They're still the 31st ranked passing defense in the National Football League. And Russell Wilson, for what it's worth, has had his moments this year where he's been able to torch bad rushing defenses. Or passing defenses, excuse me. Cincinnati Bengals being the prime example. He went out there, threw for 400 plus. Now, do I think he's going to do that in a game against Baltimore? No, it's not the DNA of this rivalry. It just isn't. Nobody's going to go out there and throw for 400 in this rivalry. At least it's not likely to happen. But with the Ravens being as good as they are against the run, like we mentioned, Russell Wilson needs to get it going. George Pickens or not, Russ needs to be the guy that goes out there and says, listen, our defense is missing key players on all three levels. I need to go out there and be much better than I was in the first matchup against the Ravens, push the ball into the end zone, and I need to take over this one and be an AFC North quarterback on the road like he was against the Cincinnati Bengals and like he was against for a lot of that Cleveland Browns game in the Snow Globe on Thursday nights.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think now my biggest question as far as your matchup to watch here, Belsky, is Mike Williams going to be the X factor in terms of that? And every week, I know it's the same question. Like, why do we trade for? Like, why did you bring in this guy if you're not going to use him? But I mean, I think if Pickens, especially if Pickens doesn't play, I think they're going to have to find a way to, throw some moon balls up to Mike Williams.
Yeah, the long ball, the moon ball is a part of the offense. Whether you want it to be the biggest part or not, it is probably the biggest part of the offense. I mean, every once in a while you need to do that to get the defense to stop just run blitzing you and stop playing within the first 10 yards. So you do need to be able to connect on a couple of those. They didn't do that against Philly. I mean, yeah, they had the flea flicker and then immediately lost the momentum after that with the Najee Harris fumble, or I guess technically, according to the official scores, a Russell Wilson fumble, which is hilarious. But you do need that a little bit more frequently this week. And I think that even more importantly than the moon ball, because Russ has it in him. And if you use Mike Williams, he has it in him as well. I mean, he showed it against the Cleveland Browns a week ago. Even more importantly, you need to get those underneath passes and those rhythm passes to connect. Last week, it was tipped ball after tipped ball. They tried to run a couple of play actions, but when the running game wasn't succeeding, Russ still had no time to throw. By the time he turned around, it was whether it was Jalen Carter or somebody else, somebody was right in his face. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, by hook or by crook, they need to get Russell Wilson going, and this needs to be a Russell Wilson game because I don't see the offensive line being able to run the ball down the Ravens' throat successfully for 4 quarters. You're going to need Russell Wilson to be able to step up and make the big plays when the big plays are called upon.
Well said. Well said. I think one other thing I just want to add in there real quick is I think if it's no Pickens, if Mike Williams still isn't doing anything, I'd love to see more targets for Pat Freiermuth. I can't figure out. I feel like every week we could be talking about this as well. Is why aren't they just throwing him 10 targets a game? I just think he could help a ton, especially when you don't have a good wide receiver too. But we'll see.
Yeah, he got 7 last week, which I believe was either at or close to his season high when it comes to targets for Pat Freiermuth. But I mean, this is a guy that scored 4 touchdowns in the Steelers' last 6 games.
Yeah,
they're looking for him, just not every single drive. It's getting to a point where, especially like you mentioned, without George Pickens, he's your number 1 receiving target. And he's the one that's going to be out there because they run a lot of sub packages. Calvin's out there sometimes. Van's out there sometimes. Shoot, Ben Skoranek had a catch last week. Pat Freiermuth is out there more often than a lot of these guys. His snap count is up. You need to utilize him and make sure that they know that every single play you could go to Pat Freiermuth and he could make an impact play, because that's the same thing that you're going to get on the other side with Mark Andrews, with Isaiah Likely. They're always on the field and they're always a threat. If you aren't able to utilize Pat Freiermuth that much, then your threats are sporadic and they can kind of key in on them.
Yep. Yeah, it'll just make it easier for Baltimore. And that's not what you want to do.